3-1-6. That was the shape that broke Atletico Madrid. That was the shape that sent Arsenal to their first Champions League final in 20 years. And if you watched that game and thought it was a boring 1-0 defensive grind, you missed everything that was actually happening underneath it. Because Mikel Arteta walked into the Emirates last night with a specific tactical answer for one of the most disciplined defensive structures in European football. And that answer was a formation that Atletico Madrid simply had no preparation for. So let us start with how Arsenal looked to build out from the back. Because before we even talk about what happened in the Atletico half, we need to understand the foundation that made everything else possible. Arsenal began in what looked like a standard 4-2-3-1. Declan Rice and Miles Lewis-Skelly as the double pivot. Eberechi as the number 10. Saka and Trossard wide. Gyökeres as the striker. Conventional enough on paper. But the moment Arsenal had the ball, the shape transformed completely into something Atletico had clearly not fully accounted for. Both center-backs stayed wide, stretching the pitch. The keeper stepped up into the build-up as an additional outfield player, becoming the middle man between the two center-backs. And Rice, rather than staying in his natural midfield position, dropped back between the center-backs to act as the primary ball carrier from deep. The result was a back three of Rice, and the two center-backs with the keeper as an additional option, giving Arsenal a 5-man structure in their own third against Atletico's 3-man press. A numerical advantage built before the ball had even moved forward. But what made this structure genuinely difficult for Atletico to press was not just the numbers. It was the rotation. And this is the part that deserves real attention. Arsenal's rotations in the build-up phase were so fluid and so deliberate that Atletico's pressers were consistently being presented with a different picture to the one they had committed to pressing. In one sequence that perfectly illustrates this, Rice retreated calmly into his own third under pressure from Atletico's front line. He played it to the keeper, and as he did, Saliba, reading the movement immediately, vacated his position and acted as an auxiliary center-back on the opposite side. Atletico's pressing structure was suddenly pointing in the wrong direction entirely. And it got more complicated because the wingers Trossard and Saka dropped deep, pulling their trackers with them. Even Koke, who was tasked with following the Arsenal pivot, found himself caught between pressing Rice and staying connected to the rest of Atletico's defensive shape. Arsenal had manufactured a 5-versus-3 overload in their own defensive third and bypassed Atletico's press entirely from it. From Saliba's progression, the ball moved to the pivot in front back to Saliba, and Arsenal were out cleanly into the middle third. This is where Declan Rice's role in this match needs to be properly acknowledged, because his contribution had very little to do with the defensive work he is famous for. It was about his ability to make Arsenal's entire build-up structure function from the deepest position on the pitch. His positioning told Saliba when to push forward. His timing triggered the fullback runs ahead of him, and his vision found the pass that 3 or 4 movements had been setting up for several seconds before it arrived. In this Arsenal system, Rice is not just a pivot sitting in front of the defensive line. He is the conductor of everything that happens behind and ahead of him simultaneously. Now let us look at what Atletico tried to do when they had the ball themselves. Because they were not simply sitting in their block waiting to be broken down. Their build-up mirrored Arsenal's in several ways. The center-back stayed wide. Koke split between them as the deep playmaker, operating in a similar role to Rice. The fullbacks pushed high, though considerably less aggressively than Arsenal's. And in front of the pivots, Julian Alvarez had a specific and crucial responsibility, dropping deep to receive, link play, set the tempo, and give Atletico a reliable connection between their defensive structure and their attacking moments. Arsenal pressed them with a front three, and Atletico's primary answer was to absorb that press and go long to the flanks, competing for second balls and looking to build from those transitional moments. Occasionally, they would go wide to the fullback and Alvarez would drop to receive and set the play from there. It gave them moments. It gave them glimpses of something dangerous on the transition. But against an Arsenal defensive structure, this organized it never gave them a genuine clear chance. And that is a conversation about what Arsenal did in the Atletico half that we need to have right now. Because when Arsenal arrived in Atletico's territory, this is where the 3-1-6 became the central tactical story of the entire match. The shape that started as a build-up structure now became an attacking weapon. Both fullbacks pushed forward, but not as traditional overlapping runners down the touchline. They moved into the half spaces, that corridor between the winger and the center-back, where Atletico's defensive block is most vulnerable and most difficult to defend without breaking the compactness of the shape. The wingers simultaneously hugged the touchline, stretching the Atletico block to its maximum width. Ez dropped from the number 10 position into what was effectively the left-back position, vacating the central space entirely, and Rice remained split between the center-backs, orchestrating from deep, while his partner Lewis Skelly pushed high, operating almost outside of zone 14. 6 players ahead of the ball, constantly rotating, constantly creating new questions for Atletico to answer. And Atletico's 5-4-1 was specifically designed to deal with exactly this kind of attacking pressure. Simeone's block was compact and narrow. Every time an Arsenal winger received on the touchline, Atletico's winger and fullback doubled up immediately. When the Arsenal fullback tried to underlap through the half space, an Atletico midfielder would follow him. The spacing between Atletico's lines was minimal. The distances between defenders deliberately short. It was a system built to make Arsenal predictable, to funnel them wide, to make them cross into a packed box and hope for the best. And for large portions of the second half it worked. But the 3-1-6 was generating something that Atletico could not fully manage with all of this defensive discipline. Because with 6 players rotating ahead of the ball simultaneously, the moment Atletico dealt with the winger on the touchline, the fullback was arriving in the half space. The moment they dealt with the fullback, the midfielder was pushing beyond. And all of that movement was doing one thing above everything else. It was pulling Atletico's defensive shape in multiple directions at once, creating the kind of structural vulnerability that only needs one moment of quality to punish. And that moment came from the right side. The connections and movements on Arsenal's right-hand side were crucial throughout this match, and they were the direct reason the winning goal happened. Because while Atletico were preoccupied with managing Ez's movement and the left side rotations, the right half space was being consistently attacked by Saka and the overlapping fullback in combinations that Atletico could not fully account for while simultaneously dealing with everything else Arsenal were doing. Now look at the goal itself. The 3-1-6 structure was active. The rotation at the back was running. But in this particular sequence, it was not Rice splitting the center-backs. It was Calafiori, the fullback, who had dropped into the central position, while Rice pushed higher to directly occupy one of Atletico's center-backs. A subtle variation of the same structure, but with a devastating consequence. Because Rice occupying that center-back meant Gyökeres suddenly had a channel to run into that, was momentarily unguarded. The center-back could not follow Gyökeres without abandoning Rice, and Rice in that position was too dangerous to leave. The through ball found Gyökeres in behind, just inside the box on the right. He did not try to finish himself. He whipped it immediately to the far post where Trossard arrived and struck it cleanly. The keeper got a touch on it, but Bukayo Saka was there at the back post in the right position at the right moment. One tap, 1-0. 20 years of waiting ended. This was not a beautiful game. It was not a high-scoring thriller, but it was a masterclass in tactical patience. Arsenal built a structure so fluid and so complex that one of the greatest defensive teams in European football spent 90 minutes trying to solve it and never fully did. The 3-1-6 was the specific answer to the 5-4-1. Arteta had the solution before the game even started, and Saka was there to finish it as he almost always is. Arsenal are in the Champions League final. But I want to know what you think. Was this the most tactically complete performance of Arsenal's season under Arteta? And do you genuinely believe they can go all the way and win it? Drop it in the comments below.